Okay. Also want to thank Square Books for hosting this, the University Press of Mississippi for publishing my book, and I want to recognize Neil White. His name's on the back of the book. He previewed the book and wrote a nice comment, as did two that didn't make it tonight, Robert Khayat and Bill Waller Jr. So I appreciate them very much doing that. I want to thank Cecil for being here tonight. He's got a hard job of keeping me on track. We have Meridian connections, but weren't that close in Meridian, but have connected off and on during the year. So I appreciate you being here, Cecil. And I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, and I join Bill in thanking you for being here tonight. I want to add a little bit more to his biography so you'll know it, because it's important to understanding what the book is all about. He was a newspaper editor. He was a statewide political campaign operative. He was a banker, successful banker. He was a state legislator. He was a member of the IHL board. He was an unsuccessful congressional candidate. He was a community development nonprofit founder and president. He was a state economic developer. He was a mentor of developing leaders, community leader, most responsible for keeping Meridian's Naval Air Station open, and he's a syndicated political columnist. So then, Bill, let me open by asking you, this is an interesting book. Of course, I've read the book. It's an interesting book. Why did you write the book? What motivated you to write this book?
I wish I could say I had planned to write this book, but I had not. In 2019, Ben and I decided to retire and move to Jackson. So in March of 2020, we moved to Jackson. As you know, right after that, COVID hit, so I had a lot of free time on my hands. After giving a commencement address at Mississippi State University, they expressed interest in my papers. So I had all those boxes full of stuff with plenty of time, so I started getting stuff out of the boxes and saying, what would Mississippi State want? What can I throw away? What should I keep? And as I did that, I started reminiscing and thinking about the different things that I had done. And I came to a couple of realizations. I started writing some sketches related to each one, the Navy base flight, IHL, etc. And so then someone suggested, you ought to put that together for your children. Okay, so I started thinking about that. But as I got into it, I realized Gil Carmichael had been a catalyst for everything good that happened to me from 1979 on. He caused me to get involved in politics. He caused me to move to Meridian, where a lot of these things generated from. And it was in his 79 campaign where the best thing in the world happened to me. I met my future wife. So I felt like, well, maybe this thing ought to be something about Gil. And also crystallized in my brain that Gil's vision for good government conservatism had really been a guide for me all through my public career. So that's then when it started to come into this type of book, because everything in here, for the most part, has something to do with Gil Carmichael's vision for good government. And so that's how I came to write the book.
Good. Why don't you introduce your wife? She's here.
This is my wife, Lynn, the former Lynn Campbell from Columbia, Mississippi.
Lynn.
I was working late in the campaign one night. You don't believe I'm going to say this. In the campaigns, Andy, as you know, you work late all the time. And in she walks and shoots me. A year later, we
with a water gun.
You mentioned several times Gil Carmichael, and throughout the book, Gil's name appears. First of all, the book covers what period of time does it cover?
50 years, from really 1975 to now.
Well, for those of you that are interested in history, this book contains information about politics and public policy for the last 50 years that you won't find anywhere else, because Bill was on the inside. He was in the inside of the Republican Party. He was watching it. He was writing about it. So if you're interested in Mississippi history the last 50 years, this is the place to go to find it. And Gil Carmichael's name not only appears in the early part, but all throughout because he was your mentor. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
And you also mentioned Sonny Montgomery, and almost as much, but not quite as much as Gil.
No, Sonny was a good friend. I knew him from 1967 on. And of course, worked closely with him and with Trenton Thad in the base closure part.
Yeah, and Gil and Sonny both were from Meridian, so I knew both of those guys too. They were good people.
Right. Shall I tell them what Gil Carmichael's vision was?
Yes, sir. I'm going to ask you. That was my next question.
Okay. Well, I'm going to read it in here. On the book, it's page 71. At least the summary is. So I'll read part of that. Upon Gil's death in 2016, the Northeast Mississippi Daily Journal wrote, political leaders like Carmichael, grounded in the private sector and visionary about governance, walked among us seldom. Carmichael caused many Mississippians to rethink what kind of state we need for all citizens. Then I start writing, just not enough such thinkers, particularly within his own party. Gil failed to get it done and others after him, but his moral and constructive good government ideas remain as a guide to pry Mississippi off the bottom in the future. They are, at that time, write a new moral constitution to reorganize and right-size government and to strengthen executive power. Run right-sized government like a business to eliminate waste, mismanagement, and corruption. Utilize savings from those efficiencies to make necessary programs effective and to uplift Mississippi's disadvantaged through improved schools and better jobs. Build a competitive two-party system to produce better government policy and diversify the Republican Party to pull people together. That was his vision, and he thought if we pursued that vision, we could lift Mississippi off the bottom.
Do you still think those precepts should apply to the Mississippi Republican Party?
I think they should apply, period.
Generally speaking.
Yeah, to anybody in government.
Anybody in any government anywhere. Right?
Well, in a democratic republic.
So let me ask you this question then. What changes have you seen in Mississippi Republican Party over the last 50 years? Until sometime 50 years ago, the Republican Party was not very strong, as we all know, in Mississippi, and almost overnight it seems that they've taken over the state in terms of politics, and following the politics came the policy. So how do you see the Mississippi Republican Party changing over the last 50 years?
Well, they went,
Mississippi.
Went, as you said, from out of power to into power. Back in the 70s, talk about this a little bit. After I worked in Gil's 75 campaign, I got involved in the party. I was a county chairman in Tallahatchie County and finished a term on the state executive committee in the late 70s. The party at that time was trying to reach out to people in the Democratic Party, independents, and particularly members of the black community to get people more involved in the party. You know, we call it the phone book party. Although when I got involved, it was a phone booth. It was a little bigger than a phone booth. And so that what Gil talked about in his vision, Charles Pickering also talked about when he was chairman of the party, about a diverse party, about a party that would lift Mississippi off the bottom, be efficient and effective. The Democratic Party had been in charge all through then, and we were on the bottom. So the idea was, give us power and we'll get you off the bottom. So we come along from, Gil lost in 75 and lost in the winter in 79. Come along, and then finally Fordyce gets elected in 1992, which starts to change the dynamic. Then you come along after his two terms, and Ronnie Musgrove gets elected, and then Haley Barbour comes along in 2004 and gets elected to 2 terms, and the legislature starts to shift at that time. Okay, and so in 2012, the Republicans took over the legislature. Soon after that, they got them a supermajority. So they are now in the same position that the Democratic Party was back in 1970. And some of the same occurrences in government. I call these holes in the hole in the book. Holes in the hole mean holes in the programs, policies, practices, and performance of people in Mississippi that are in leadership positions. And so we got now where we are performing, I say this, the party leaders and party base are performing similarly to the Democratic base back in the 70s. Okay, they like power and they cling to power. They're not for in general for diversifying the party like they were. They're not for sharing power with Democrats. And so we have got 180 degrees in my perspective. I write about that. I'm not saying it very well, from the early 70s.
Well, in my experience, I was in the legislature 16 years, and I was there a little after Fort Ice. I was the Emeritus chief of staff before I started elected. And then I was in the legislature 16 years after that when the takeover occurred. And from my perspective, the Republicans, like I know, for a lot of them, the Republicans who are now, many of the Republicans who are now in the legislature were Democrats. And they're no different. I mean, they haven't changed, the people haven't changed, they simply changed parties. And a lot of the new Republicans that have been elected would have been Democrats when the Democrats were in charge. It's the same sort of mindset in the legislature, who's in control, who has power, that sort of stuff. It was then. It really hadn't changed, it's just changed parties. Would you agree with that?
Generally, I agree.
Yeah. Gil was a businessman when he ran for office, and he had a lot of business experience, but you had a lot of experience in a lot of different professions over your career. And you had experience in the executive branch, you had experience in the state executive branch when you worked for Haley Barber. You've had a lot of experience in the legislative branch. You've had experience in the nonprofit arena when you ran a nonprofit organization. I've been on the boards of several state agencies and that sort of stuff. How has that helped inform you in terms of your opinion about politics and policy in Mississippi?
I got to live in 10 communities in Mississippi when I was in the newspaper business, from Tunica to Jackson to Gulfport. Big, little, different areas of the state. That helped inform my perspective. I got to work with people in power in government. I got to work with people without power in the underneath economy, and work with the good souls that strive every day to try to get them out from under. Those experiences have shaped my opinion and actually cemented my feelings about Gil Carmichael's vision, but then also got me committed to the concept of servant leadership. We need more leaders who practice that than we seem to have today. So that would be my takeaways from that breadth of experience.
Yeah, I'll add to that. When you read the book, you'll see that throughout the book. Gil wrote a lot of columns over those 50 years, and I said Bill. I'm thinking Gil Carmichael. Are you Gil Carmichael? No. Bill wrote a lot of columns over all those years, and they are posted throughout the book. And throughout the book, you'll see the column itself that he wrote, and then you'll see a lot of the history around that column and why he wrote the column and what happened after he wrote the column and that sort of thing. It's very, very helpful to put that into perspective that you won't see anywhere else. I've also told Bill yesterday that it holds his feet to the fire. He can't change history. He wrote what he wrote back then is what he's saying right now. What do you think about that, Joey? Why did you put the columns in the book?
Well, the easy answer is it helped fill up the book. Another answer is some of my best writing is in those columns. Yeah. And second, I saw no need to paraphrase and rewrite what I've already written to tell the same story. In discussions with my editor, he said, you ought to just paraphrase this. I said, no, I want to do it this way because I like the columns. I want to put the columns in place, and went with that.
I like it because you, as I said, when you read the column that was written 25 years ago, and then you read what's your comments about the column, you know that you're being consistent in your opinion. You haven't changed your opinion about Gil Carmichael since you met Gil Carmichael.
Well, look, there were a few things he caused me to change my opinion about, but not politics.
Yeah.
He's the godfather of my children.
At some point, you began to add biblical references to the ends of your columns, and I don't remember exactly what point that was, but why did you do that? What caused you to do that?
Well, I'm going to read it again because it's easier for me to say it that way. This is on page 108 and 9. Where does it start? I confess my sinful nature and need to pray daily for forgiveness and guidance. Though once physically saved by placing my life in God's hands, at another time glimpsing an angel sent to spare my mother's life until she could witness the birth of her first grandson, it took the Christian family at First Presbyterian Church in Meridian years later to save me. In late 2019, I began adding Bible verses to my columns as a form of personal testimony. So that's why I do it.
Yeah, it was very interesting. I mean, I don't know how hard it was for you to find specific references, but it is interesting to read the column and then to read what's about it. It's also interesting to read that 2,000 years ago, the same things were happening then that are happening today.
Well, spiritually anyway.
Now, some of your columns, you're a Republican. You've been a Republican a long time. You've been deeply involved in Republican Party politics and policy. You expressed some pretty strong opinions about the Republican Party as it stands today in Mississippi and what you think needs to be changed and that sort of stuff. Have you got any kind of backlash from Republicans on what, and throughout the column, not just the book, but you had columns about that throughout the latter part of your editorial career?
Anybody here read the Jackson Jambalaya?
I used to.
Read my column there and then read the comments. Yeah, I get a lot of criticism. Not that much via email or phone calls, but that's where I get most of it.
Well, it's pretty brave for any politician to take a stand against what's going on in his own party. So I admire you for doing that, and I think you're pretty forthright in what you had to say.
One of the things I would mention is it's interesting that so many people will be so critical when they can be anonymous, but they don't want to put their names on the criticism. And whereas I put my name on every column.
The title of the book has the word lament. What did you mean by that, and what do you mean by that today in terms of your opinion? What are you talking about when you say you're lament? What are your laments?
As I mentioned back in the 70s, the vision of Gil and the focus of the party was the Democrats that kept Mississippi on the bottom. We're going to get Mississippi off the bottom. So we skip forward now 50 years. And on pages 73 and 74, I list 54 categories where Mississippi remains on the bottom or next to the bottom. This front cover, most people misinterpret it. It has a bunch of red counties and a bunch of dark blue counties. They think that's political. The red counties are the 43 counties in Mississippi with persistent poverty. That means they've had 20% or more of the population living in poverty for 30 consecutive years or more. My lament is that we're still in this situation today.
I agree with you. So now that you look at Mississippi and you look at what the party's doing, what would you do different? What do you want to see change?
Leadership.
Leadership?
The style of leadership, the style of leadership. Yeah. Everybody asks me, well, what's the solution? How are you going to get people out of poverty? How are you going to change the state? And I don't have an answer for that in terms of a program or spending. What I present in the book is a process that I have seen come together in different areas and put it together. It starts with something we don't seem to do very well, and that's rigorous thinking and planning. That we think through, we look ahead at what the consequence is going to be, and we then implement that. And so we've had problems implementing things. And then once we implement good things, we have a lot of trouble sustaining them. The lack of sustained leadership in programs, I'm talking generations, is the biggest hindrance we have. So I write in here about the Tupelo story. The Tupelo area is the one place that I've seen where they built a culture of progress, and they've sustained it now through several generations. It's not perfect, but that's the best example I've seen. And we can't seem to do that in other areas or at the state level. It takes a lot of collaborative leadership. It takes a lot of hard thinking and hard work to get it done. It's not quick, it's not easy. But that's the process that I recommend that we need if we're really going to make an effort to get off the bottom.
You mentioned Tupelo, and just as sort of an aside, the former editor of the Northeast Daily Journal from Tupelo, Lloyd Gray, the bishop's son, bishop's brother and son, wrote a foreword along with C.D. Smith from Meridian, who's a great public leader, service leader over at Meridian, wrote the foreword to this book, and I think you'll enjoy reading the foreword. They agree with you, obviously. So Tupelo is a great city. I've had a lot of experience with Tupelo, and as far as I know, it's unique in Mississippi. There are others that try to do that, but so far as I know.
But it is comparable. There's a little bitty town in West Alabama, in Clark County, that the mayor came up here and studied Tupelo and went back and implemented as much as he could. And that little town in a high poverty county is prosperous. The schools and the businesses and the community all work together. They have a common plan. They have one of the better school districts. They try to get every junior and senior in that school during the summer to have a job, so they learn to work. They have a very good 2+2 program with the technical college that's located there. The things that need to be done to improve communities, to make them get better over time, they're doing, and they copied it from Tupelo. So it is something that can transfer with the right leadership.
When I was with Governor Mavis, we had a meeting with Standard & Poor's. They came down. We got on an airplane, took them around the state. We went to Tupelo. We'd been to several towns, and when we go to a town, you meet with the board of supervisors, and then you meet with the mayor and the council, or the mayor separately, and then the council, then you meet with the school board. In Tupelo, when we got there, they were all in the same room. Every public body, leadership of all the public bodies met with us at the same time. It was just striking the difference between having them all in the same room saying the same thing and hearing different things from different public bodies. So I agree with you.
And I would add this component to it. And Grace Folk, who was head of MDA, told me this in practice, and I've seen it. Every great sustained program has strong business leadership. The business folks get involved, and you don't just depend on the politicians to keep it going. And it takes more than politicians to make things work. Generally, politicians are running with the crowd. They go where the constituents want them to go. It's the rare leader that gets out there ahead of the people and tries to lead them in the right direction. There's some that do and some effectively, but that's not the common practice.
Well, don't tell the politicians that.
Well, remember, we were one.
I know. Guilty. Well, with that, do you have any closing comments on that before we turn it over and get some questions from folks?
Buy the book. Thank you for doing this. I would just say, this for me is a capstone of my writing career. You write columns for 50 years, and they just fade away. So what this does is put a capstone there, so this won't fade away as easily. And so that's why another thing that I saw is this being, I can't talk now, is this book accomplishing for me. So that's what this is in part, is a capstone of my writing career.
Well, thank you, Bill. It's a great book, and I agree. Buy the book. All right, well, have we got time for some questions? I think we do. So if you've got a question, would you raise your hand and give us your name and have a question for Bill? Any questions about it? Questions about Mississippi politics?
This is a sedate group.
They really are. You're not asleep after the election.
Yeah, Greg.
My name is Graham Pitts. I teach history here at Ole Miss. And my question, which I think is perhaps appropriate for today, is what are the prospects for an alliance between the left and good government conservatives, as you described? And what are the limits of that alliance?
In Mississippi?
Yes, sir. Or beyond, whatever you
Well,
feel called to
there
speak
are
to.
alliances already between moderates in both parties. That's what this exhibits right here today. Now, how widespread that can be, I don't know. The national politics so dominate state politics, it's hard to see how that can happen. But I'm still hopeful. And I end the book, I'll say, with a prayer that this will happen.
There is some hope in the legislature. This legislature, I'm not involved day to day, but this legislature seems to have people who are more willing to work together than the last couple of legislatures, and that comes from the top, especially in the House, where Jason White has taken over. I hope he holds on to what he's done so far, but I think that's a good sign so far. The politicians don't hate each other. They don't dislike each other.
They're not bad people.
No, they're not bad people. They're occasionally. Most of them want what's good for Mississippi, but it's just that they're plugged into this party politics.
Rick?
Yeah, as someone who's had some experience with municipal politics, I found it sometimes difficult to work with the county political body, and I think that that's probably common throughout the 82 counties in Mississippi and those that have dominant cities in that county. And I'm wondering if you have any observations about, I think it has something to do with the two forms of government that kind of prevent them from getting along in some way. Do you have any ideas about how that might improve?
You're right. They each have their power, and they cling to it and don't want to yield it often. But I would come back and say again what I just talked about. If the business and civic and education, the religious leaders in the community come together for something, then the city and the county politicians will come together. But it takes that sort of force, that upwelling of something in the community. We saw this in the Navy base fight in Meridian. We were threatened. We all came together, city, county, committed to that effort. I said, wow, after this we'll be together and keep going. It faded because the leadership wasn't there. There was no more threat, and we just fell back into our old ways. It's hard to sustain, okay? Somebody asked me at another reading, did I believe that power corrupts? And I just simply said yes. And that's what happens in city and county government, state government, and federal government. Okay, you have to have good-hearted people, well-intentioned people, servant leaders, wanting to work together for it to happen. Or you have to have those people pushing on the hard-hearted people to get them to do right. And
just a statement and all. Bill, you remember in 1980, early 1980s, when we were working on the education changes, I found that the legislature, of course, was all Democrat, except, no exception, but most of them, those in power, in the power committees, were from the Delta. And Speaker of the House, Chairman of Appropriation, Chairman of Ways and Means, Chairman of Finance, were all from the Delta. And they didn't want anything to change. And they fought change. And I often wondered what was the problem with a program so kind and sweet as kindergarten. Why was this fierce fight over kindergarten. And I finally realized it was a threat to their power. They were losing power because you had a lot of other Democrats from the coast and from other places who were tired of the Delta dominating, and they wanted a piece of the action.
I wrote about how hard that was in here.
Good. And then the last thing I want to say is that I agree with you wholehearted on leadership. You have to have a succession of good leaders. And I point that out about the University of Mississippi. You had 11 years of Gerald Turner, you had 14 years of Robert Khayat, and you had 6 years of Dan Jones. That's 31 years of strong leadership. And that's kind of what put Ole Miss, in my opinion, ahead of everybody else.
We won't charge you for that commercial.
Bill, one of my favorite pieces of the book was, I won't reveal it because I don't want to ruin it for everybody, is a conversation between Dan Jones and our governor. So when it comes to something like Medicaid that we all know about, that would add $3 billion to the economy, the money would go to working people and it would help the poor. When your party's philosophy trumped something that would help poor people and the economy over we don't like spending money, taxpayer money. When did it get to that point, and how does the Republican Party get back centered where people trump that?
Is that a fun?
Excuse me? Yes. It was.
It won't be easy. You know, the politics that was being played by some party leaders was when it was an Obamacare bill and it had Obamacare on the name, Obama's name on it, so they were not going to be for it. And the governor apparently still believes that. I don't know what happened this year. But that political ideology overrode all the concerns you're talking about. I'll back up and mention another way to look at how things ought to work in Mississippi is market-driven things. And one of the things we're suffering now is the decline of rural communities, losing jobs, people moving out. And so what you want to have are economic engines in these rural counties. And what's been the main economic engine in many counties? Hospitals. They employ nurses, they employ doctors, and lots of other people. And clinics form around them, and you have good paid jobs come in there. And without expanding Medicaid, we're allowing so many of those economic engines to die. Why? Particularly now, we know that if we implement it now, it won't really cost anything for the state, at least not in the foreseeable future. So that, as I write, is just hard-hearted politics, driven more by national ideology than the needs of Mississippi.
Well, I was there when that, and worked very, very hard on expanding Medicaid. We put together a group of nonprofit organizations that worked extremely hard to get that done. And Bill and I, this is one of the places Bill and I will probably disagree. But Haley Barber was the key to this. Haley Barber fought this tooth and nail. And he and his staff, many of whom I know, were misrepresenting what Medicaid was all about. They were saying we couldn't afford it. It's going to cost more money. And they were saying it'll never last. It'll only last 2 or 3 years. And we'll put all these people on Medicaid, and then the federal government's going to cut their funding, and we'll be left holding the bag. I mean, it was a terrible. They put a terrible force on it to try to kill it, and they did. I mean, they just did it. In fact, they wouldn't even let the bills come up for debate. We had one bill that passed the Senate that would have allowed us to amend the health care law to expand Medicaid. It came from the Senate. They had the language in there, but they didn't expand it. But we could have expanded it in the House. The Speaker of the House sent it to a committee on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock that didn't meet, wasn't supposed to meet, and they killed it while everybody else was gone home. So that's the kind of politics that was being played with it. And you were right, it was pure, absolute politics. It wasn't that they didn't understand it. It didn't, and they can all say, well, it didn't understand this, I didn't understand that. Baloney. It's not that complicated. They understood the numbers, they understood what was going to happen and who was going to benefit from it, but it was Obamacare. In fact, a lot of those guys would call it, they say, I'm not going to vote for any Obamacare. Tate said that repeatedly. I'm not going to vote for to let people vote on Obamacare. Obama hadn't been president in years. I mean, what's the big deal? But that's, I get pretty angry about all that because a lot of people had died who shouldn't have died, and a lot of people have been very, very sick who shouldn't have been very, very sick as a result of what they did after it was passed. And I hope they had nightmares about it at night. Yes.
I was going to ask, why do you think Delbert Hosemann gave the impression he was for expanding Medicaid and then he killed it?
Well, to defend Delbert in part, one, he read his members of the Senate and they were not going to vote for that. Second, he did propose a form of expanded Medicaid, which would provide the coverage up to 100% of the poverty level, but then use the, what's the word? Or current method for under the exchange method for providing coverage for people over 100% of poverty. And so they came very close to passing a version of that, but ran out of gas at the end. The sense I get from both the Speaker and Lieutenant Governor, they're going to push on that same issue again this year. Maybe they can reach a compromise.
I want to comment on that too. Just been involved in it so long, I apologize. If Delbert wanted it to pass, it would pass. I'll just tell you that. I won't get into all the politics of it. Lieutenant Governor can get anything passed he wants through the Senate, almost without exception. If he wanted it to pass, it would pass. And he would have to fight for it. He'd have to talk to people, but he could get it passed. That's just a fact. That's an opinion.
He might have to change committee chairman to get it done.
He may have to change committee. They've changed committee chairman before. They've done a lot of different things before. But if he wanted it to pass, he may have to work hard to get it passed. But he can get it passed. I mean, you don't see anything that the lieutenant governor wants done that does not get out of the Senate. It just does not happen. I don't know why. I can't tell you why. Bill was a friend of mine. He's been a friend of mine for 50 years, so I feel bad saying that. But it's an important issue.
I would disagree a little, but let's don't go there. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you all.